press. I mean, they're getting a license. I would think maybe their license should be taken away. It would be up to Brendan Carr. I think Brendan Carr is outstanding. He's a patriot. He loves our country, and he's a tough guy. So we'll have to see.
Let's start this hour with NBC News White House correspondent Vaughn Hilliard, Zach Beecham, senior correspondent at Vox, and Dominic Patton, executive editor at Deadline Hollywood. Vaughn, we heard the president there suggests that broadcasters who allow critical coverage of him should have their licenses pulled. How seriously is the administration looking into this?
Brendan Carr said that this is not going to be the final shoe to drop, referring to the preemption of Jimmy Kimmel here. He openly promoted the idea that the FCC is effectively, quote, constraining the power of major corporations like Disney and the parent company of NBC, Comcast. This is a movement and an effort here within the FCC by Trump-appointed chairman Brendan Carr to effectively constrain the influence that major media companies have over what is ultimately hitting the airwaves here. And Carr himself suggested ahead of the preemption of Jimmy Kimmel's show on Wednesday that they would seek to potentially fine or try to revoke the broadcast licenses of those television stations that air Jimmy Kimmel Live. And so this is a moment here where the president, on his way back from the UK on Air Force One last night, affirmed the efforts within the FCC by Brendan Carr and the other commissioner that was also a Trump appointee. And so this is a big moment here of what else may happen, whether at the direct hands of the FCC or sort of the unforced obedience by any of these major corporate entities that ultimately are the ones that are choosing what is to be broadcasted on television stations across the country.
It sounds like they may have another target in their sights, too. The head of the FCC, Carr, also said The View could be investigated. What's happening there?
Right. This is also a question here of exactly what kind of other pressure comes from Carr. We have seen here in the situation, if you look back in July, you saw that the major Skydance Paramount merger was held up there for multiple months. It was at that point in time that the CBS announced a cancellation of Colbert's Late Show and also announced a settlement agreement with President Trump, who had filed the lawsuit. And now what you are seeing here is Brendan Carr in a very public way, suggesting that, for example, The View should be the next in line, that they are contending that there has been an outsized influence of anti-conservative, anti-Trump rhetoric on television airwaves, and that it should be the local broadcaster's decision about whether they promote or whether they air that type of content. And we should note that a major share of these local television entities are owned by large corporations themselves. In this case, it was Nexstar, which already owns more than 200 local television broadcasts. So if there was an effort to try to revoke the licenses, which would require a major FCC process and that undoubtedly legal proceedings in the courts thereafter, this would be a decision there that would be impacting particularly some of these major companies like Nexstar, Sinclair Broadcasting, Tegna, those that hold the licenses here in a great share of the majority of these television networks that air are affiliates for example, ABC and network entities.
Yeah. Lots of layers to all of this. Vaughn Hilliard, thank you. Dominic, you have some new reporting about what's going on behind the scenes at Disney over this decision. What are you learning?
Well, what we're learning on is that there are ongoing talks at the highest level with Kimmel and Disney executives like Dana Walden, the chair of Disney Entertainment, about trying to find what has been said to me as a pathway to getting Jimmy back on the air. Now, those talks are happening at the same time as we're learning that there is dissent within some of the upper ranks of Disney about the way this was handled by CEO Bob Iger and Walden, and that there a lot of back and forth about this, and that there's a feeling that it could have been dealt with in a lot more of a more deft handling, for lack of a better expression. So there's almost like a tale of two corporations happening here as they try to find a way to navigate this. Now, obviously, there are more meetings planned. We have no information of whether or not they've actually found that pathway. Jimmy Kimmel is still the host of the syndicated version of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, but that filming is all done. The finale, I think, is going to be next week on stations, so we'll see where that goes. I will tell you one thing, though, that's very interesting, and Vaughn's analysis particularly made me think of this. This is really a game of chicken with the FCC and with Trump. You know, it's interesting what the president said. He talked about bad publicity. He talked about ratings. He sounds like a man who's living in the early 2000s and not in the age of streaming and digital. And people should be careful. They can remember is that linear TV is, by everyone's acknowledgement, changing and certainly declining in its audience share. The FCC's reach can only go so far in 2025, and they might find themselves up the creek without the regulatory paddle they think they're wielding so powerfully.
And Zach, it is not just Disney and ABC. Nexstar and Sinclair also have big roles in this situation, as Vaughn was discussing. They own dozens and dozens of ABC affiliate stations around the country. What's their calculation in this moment?
Well, Sinclair is a conservative company, right? It's owned and has been accused of broadcasting what could be, I think accurately, having watched the broadcast, described as conservative propaganda that was disguised or wrapped up in news programming. So Sinclair has an ideological stake. Nexstar, I think, is a little bit different. Nexstar is in the midst of attempting to conduct a $6.2 billion merger with other local station owners. Now, the wrinkle here is that Nexstar owns about 39% of the market share, which is the legal cap. Like, you can't own more stations than Nexstar currently owns, but not by statute, by FCC regulation, FCC rule. So the FCC, and Carr has said that he's considering lifting that merger. Or lifting that cap. It's very similar to the CBS merger that was being discussed earlier, right? In the sense that the government has a lot of leverage at this point in time. They could just choose not to lift that cap, right? And given who Brendan Carr is and given what the Trump administration is, it's very rational for Nexstar's owners to be like, well, we're not going to get our merger if we're not going to do things that comply with their dictates. It's why all of a sudden, I mean, the timeline is very striking here. It's not like Nexstar had a huge problem with Jimmy Kimmel immediately when he spoke about the killing of Charlie Kirk on Monday. It was only after Brendan Carr appeared on a conservative podcast on Wednesday and threatened Nexstar that they decided all of a sudden that they had this like real principled objection to what Jimmy Kimmel had said in his Monday night monologue and that they were preempting him, which is a very unusual step. It's just the pathway of influence here is excruciatingly clear, even if we haven't been able to fully prove it with internal reporting inside Nexstar.
Yeah, you mentioned, Zach, the CBS situation with Colbert. We have seen a series of media companies make decisions that appear to be aimed at making the president happy. CBS parent company Paramount announcing they would end that late show with Stephen Colbert. They also reached a $16 million settlement with Trump over a 60 Minutes interview. In addition to suspending Jimmy Kimmel, ABC settled a defamation lawsuit related to George Stephanopoulos, forking over millions of dollars. The Washington Post, its owner, Jeff Bezos, revamped the paper's opinion section. And now we have Trump filing lawsuits against the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, which haven't, rolled over, certainly, but he's also blocked the White House access to the Associated Press. Zach, what are the consequences of companies essentially caving to the wants of Trump and his administration?
Well, I mean, the way that economic policymaking in the U.S. is supposed to work is it's supposed to follow rules, right? There are predictable and stable ways in which corporations make their decisions based not on who's in the White House, but based on what the law is, how it's supposed to work, how it serves the public interest, and what their own bottom line is. But in this case, the Trump administration has changed the way that economic policy works in the United States. Everything is now conducted via deals with the president, right? And so tariffs are the clearest example of this, because the tariffs are very painful for American corporations, but you can get exemptions on tariffs if the president